Hello and welcome. We're so glad you're here. Whether you're relaxing after a long day, preparing to drift off to sleep, or just curious about humanity's oldest struggles, you're in the right place. Now, picture this. The world is locked in ice. Vast sheets of glaciers cover entire continents. Temperatures plunge, food is scarce, and dangerous predators roam frozen landscapes. For early humans, survival wasn't guaranteed. Every single day was a test. This isn't just a story. It's an educational journey through one of the coldest, harshest chapters in human history. We'll explore what the Ice Age was, how the planet froze again and again over thousands of years, and what those glacial periods meant for life on Earth. We'll see how humans endured brutal cold, wearing animal skins, building sturdy shelters, and mastering fire for warmth and safety. We'll walk beside hunters tracking mammoths and bison, gatherers finding roots beneath snow, and families huddled together in caves and huts. We'll discover the tools and weapons they shaped from stone, bone, and antler, how tribes cooperated, migrated across vast ice bridges, and even encountered other human species like Neanderthals and Denisovans. And finally, we'll see how this age of hardship ended, how warming climates reshaped the Earth, how giant Ice Age animals vanished, and how the lessons learned still echo in humanity today. So take a deep breath. Imagine the crunch of snow underfoot, the glow of a fire in endless darkness, and the quiet strength of humans who refused to give up. This is how humans survived the Ice Age. Before we begin, tell us, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Drop a comment below. We love seeing your messages from all over the world. And just one quick reminder, please subscribe to the channel and like this video, because if you relax too much and fall asleep before the end, you might forget to do it later. So take a second now. Your support helps us share more peaceful, fascinating journeys through history. You are the reason this channel exists. Without you, it simply wouldn't be possible to make videos like this. Your comments, your views, your support, that's what keeps this journey alive. Now, let's step into the frozen world of our ancestors. The story of the Ice Age begins long before the first humans painted images on cave walls or carved tools from stone. It begins with the Earth itself, a restless planet circling the sun, forever shifting, tilting, breathing in cycles that stretch far beyond the span of any single human life. To us, the Ice Age may seem like one single event, as if the world suddenly froze and remained in silence for thousands upon thousands of years. But in truth, it was a rhythm, a heartbeat of cold and warmth, advance and retreat, a pulse that carried life along its unpredictable currents. When we speak of the Ice Age, what we are really speaking of is the Pleistocene epoch, a time when vast glaciers crept over continents and then pulled back again, shaping the land and the lives of everything that dwelled upon it. It was a world unlike our own, and yet it was the crucible in which our ancestors learned to adapt, survive, and become human as we know ourselves today. To understand what the Ice Age was, one must imagine the Earth in its entirety, not just a winter in Europe or snow in the Northern Hemisphere, but a planet gripped by deep planetary change. Beginning around 2.6 million years ago, global temperatures cooled significantly, setting into motion an age of repeating glacial and interglacial cycles. For tens of thousands of years at a time, massive ice sheets, some more than 3 kilometers thick, advanced across northern continents, grinding down mountains, burying valleys, and pressing their frozen weight into the earth. These were not the seasonal snows we know, but enormous frozen landscapes that transformed whole regions. During these icy dominations, sea levels fell dramatically, exposing land that is now hidden beneath ocean. Then, as the climate shifted again, warmth would return, glaciers would melt, and seas would rise, drowning coastlines and reshaping continents. The Ice Age was not one endless winter, but a great pendulum, swinging slowly but relentlessly between worlds of cold and warmth. Scientists have come to know these cycles by studying the evidence left behind in stone and ice. Cores drilled deep into Greenland and Antarctica hold frozen records of ancient atmospheres, trapping bubbles of air that tell us what the world once breathed. Sediments layered in the bottom of lakes and seas whisper stories of shifting climates, dust and pollen carried on winds long forgotten. From these clues we learn that the Ice Age was not singular but a repeating story, with glaciers advancing and retreating in great waves. In Europe, geologists gave these great periods of glaciation names that sound like echoes of an ancient saga: Gunz, Meindil, Rhys and Wern. Each one lasted tens of thousands of years, reshaping landscapes and ecosystems. In North America, the pattern bore different names: Nebraskan, Kansan, Illinoisan, Wisconsinin, yet the essence was the same, a relentless cycle of ice and thaw, an unyielding rhythm of nature's power. Imagine the world during the height of one of these glaciations, such as the last great one, the Wisconsinin, which peaked around 20,000 years ago. In the northern hemisphere, Canada lay buried beneath an immense sheet of ice known as the Laurentide, a frozen continent upon a continent, stretching from the Atlantic coast to the Rocky Mountains. In Europe, the Fennoscandian ice sheet pressed down across Scandinavia, its weight carving fjords, valleys, and lakes that still shape the region today. Vast glaciers descended from the Alps, spilling into the plains, while in South America, the Andes carried their own icy cloaks. In total, nearly a third of the Earth's surface was covered in ice, and even in lands not blanketed directly, the climate was colder, drier, and harsher than anything most of us can imagine today. The Ice Age was not simply cold, it was transformative, a force that remade the face of the Earth itself. And yet, these cycles of ice and warmth were not random. They were guided by the movements of the Earth around the Sun, by the tilt of its axis, by the subtle dance of celestial mechanics known as the Milankovitch cycles. When the Earth tilted differently, when its orbit shifted from round to elliptical, and back again, when it wobbled on its axis like a top slowing on a table, sunlight struck the planet in changing ways. Over thousands of years, these small variations added up, determining whether summers were warm enough to melt the winter's snow, or whether snow lingered year after year, building into ice sheets that marched outward like silent armies. The Ice Age, then, was written not only in the rocks of the Earth, but in the mathematics of the heavens. But what did this mean for the world in which life struggled to persist? The global climate of the Ice Age was colder, but it was also marked by extreme. Near the equator, tropical regions remained relatively warm, though often drier, with deserts expanding further than they do today. In mid-latitudes, grasslands stretched wide, creating vast steppes that supported herds of great animals, mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, giant bison, creatures whose size and strength made them symbols of the age. Forests shrank and expanded with the climate's shifts, and rivers changed their courses as glaciers advanced, damming valleys and carving new paths when they receded. Sea levels could fall by more than 100 meters during glacial peaks, exposing land bridges like Beringia between Asia and North America. These land bridges were not barren wastelands, but rich ecosystems, teeming with life, and they offered passageways for humans and animals to move into new worlds. The climate was not uniform either. While much of the north was locked in ice, regions farther south held environments that, while still cold, were habitable and fertile in their own way. In places like Africa, climates fluctuated between wetter and drier periods, shaping the availability of lakes and rivers that sustained early human populations. These variations pushed humans to move, to adapt, to seek out new resources and lands, and in doing so, they became ever more resilient. It was this patchwork world of ice, steppe, desert, and forest that set the stage for the greatest test of survival our species had ever known. To walk through an Ice Age landscape would have been to walk through contrast. In one direction, the horizon might be filled with the endless white of a glacier, its surface groaning and cracking with the slow pressure of centuries. In another, winds might whip across grasslands where hardy plants clung low to the ground and herds of great beasts grazed. The air itself would have carried a different taste, thinner in oxygen, drier in moisture, with dust storms common in some regions where glaciers ground rock into powder and winds carried it across continents. Nights would fall bitterly cold, stars sharper and clearer than most of us have ever seen, while days might bring only a weak sun, struggling to melt frost clinging even to the edges of forests. This was the theatre in which humanity lived and evolved, an environment both hostile and awe-inspiring, demanding not just survival, but ingenuity. It is tempting to think of the Ice Age only as hardship, but there was also beauty in it. The aurora borealis would have danced in skies far south of where we see it today, rippling curtains of green and red over plains where mammoth herds trudged silently across the snow. Rivers would have gleamed like silver threads across frozen steppes, and in the shelter of caves firelight would have cast shadows of humans telling stories, their voices echoing against stone walls while the wind howled outside. It was a time of trial, yes, but it was also a time of wonder. a time when the raw power of nature was visible in every horizon, and the resilience of life proved itself again and again. The Ice Age was not merely a geological event, it was a crucible of human experience. It taught our ancestors to adapt to the harshest climates, to follow the migrations of animals, to invent tools, clothing, and shelters that could protect them from the cold. It forced them to understand the world in new ways, to work together, to find meaning in survival itself. Without the Ice Age, humanity would not be what it is today. The glaciers carved not only valleys and mountains, they carved our spirit, our capacity for endurance, and our drive to create and to endure. And though the last great glacial period ended some 12,000 years ago, melting into the warmer Holocene epoch that cradled the rise of civilization, its memory remains imprinted in our myths, our stories, and our very bones. The Earth still remembers. It remembers in the deep scars left by glaciers, in the great lakes that fill the basins they carved, in the fertile soils left behind when the ice retreated. It remembers in the patterns of climate that continue to shift, in the lingering cycles of warmth and cold that remind us we are never separate from the great forces of nature. The Ice Age is not gone. It is a chapter in a story that continues, one in which we are still participating. To understand it is to understand not only our past but also our place in the great, unfolding drama of the Earth. The Ice Age was not merely a long winter, but a trial that reached into every aspect of human existence. Each breath of cold air, each step across frozen earth, each bite of scarce food carried with it the weight of survival. To live during that time meant waking each day into a world where death lurked at the edges of every horizon, sometimes in the invisible chill of the wind, sometimes in the hollow ache of an empty stomach, sometimes in the gleam of a predator's eyes. For our ancestors, survival was not a background task. It was the central story of their lives, shaping their thoughts, their choices, their bonds with one another, and even the very evolution of the human body and mind. To imagine their existence, one must set aside the comforts of the modern world and step into a land where the cold never truly released its grip, where food was never guaranteed, and where being human meant being vulnerable to forces far larger and fiercer than oneself. The cold was the most constant and unforgiving of adversaries. It was not simply a chill in the air, or the frost of a winter morning. It was a cold that pressed itself into the marrow of bones, that stripped heat from the body with merciless efficiency, that turned breath into clouds that crystallized and vanished as though life itself were being stolen by the wind. For those who lived near the edges of the great glaciers, the cold was an unbroken presence. The ice sheets stretched across the land like frozen seas, their surfaces shimmering in the pale light of a weakened sun. Winds poured down from them, carrying with them an edge sharp enough to burn the skin, cutting into the body until even the strongest men and women shivered uncontrollably. At night, the cold deepened further, wrapping itself around the earth like a suffocating blanket. Fire became not only a tool but a line between existence and extinction. And yet fire was fragile, snuffed out by storms, difficult to kindle in damp conditions, costly to sustain when fuel was scarce. The mastery of flame was a constant battle, and in losing it, a group could lose their lives within hours. This unyielding chill carried consequences beyond discomfort. The human body is finely tuned to balance its internal temperature, and when exposed for too long to the biting cold, it begins to betray itself. Numbness sets in, followed by the creeping danger of frostbite, where fingers and toes blacken and dun. Hypothermia, silent and insidious, dulls the mind until decision-making falters, and the will to fight fades into lethargy. Many would have succumbed not in moments of dramatic catastrophe, but quietly. Hunters who wandered too far without shelter, children who could not endure the long nights, elders whose strength failed them against the endless winter. For our ancestors, the cold was not only an enemy to be fought with fire and clothing, but a teacher that demanded constant vigilance. It instilled habits of caution, foresight, and cooperation, for a single careless mistake could mean death, not only for one but for many. If the cold gnawed at the body, hunger gnawed at the spirit. Food was not simply sustenance in the Ice Age, it was salvation, and its absence was despair. Large herds of animals roamed the tundra and steppe, mammoths with shaggy coats, bison moving in vast numbers, reindeer whose migrations painted the land with life. To hunt them was to confront giants. A mammoth could weigh as much as 6 tons, its tusks sweeping arcs of ivory, its strength more than enough to trample hunters into the frozen earth. To bring one down required planning, courage, and unity. Spears tipped with flint, coordinated strategies to drive animals toward traps or cliffs, and the sheer determination of many working together were all necessary. A successful hunt meant meat for days or weeks, hides for warmth, bones for tools, sinew for string. Every part of the animal was precious, for nothing could be wasted. But failure meant hunger, and hunger in the Ice Age was not an inconvenience. It was a shadow that stretched long over families, a whisper of weakness that grew louder with each passing day without nourishment. Plant foods existed, but they were seasonal, fragile, and often hidden beneath frozen soil. Women and children scoured the land for edible roots, berries and nuts, bending close to the earth in search of treasures that could make the difference between life and death. In warmer interludes, grasses and herbs sprouted, and families learned which could be gathered safely and which would poison. Seeds and dried plants were stored carefully, but storage itself carried risks, for mold or pests could rob a family of their reserves in a single season. To walk the Ice Age world was to walk with hunger always just behind, threatening to overtake at any moment. It shaped not only diets but minds, teaching early humans the value of foresight, of sharing, of remembering which valleys or hillsides bore fruit, which rivers carried fish, which caves could offer safety near hunting grounds. Yet the land itself, beyond cold and hunger, was filled with dangers that pressed down upon human life. The Ice Age was a sculptor, carving the earth into landscapes of both beauty and peril. Glaciers ground mountains into valleys, left behind moraines of jagged rock, and cut rivers that raged with meltwater in the brief summers. To travel these lands was to confront unpredictability at every turn. Ice could crack beneath the weight of a hunter, crossing a frozen river, plunging him into waters that stole life in minutes. Avalanches swept down snowy slopes with thunderous force, erasing paths and lives alike. Storms came without warning, blinding blizzards that left travelers disoriented, erasing familiar landmarks until even seasoned hunters could lose their way. In some regions, the earth itself shifted as glaciers retreated, unleashing floods that swept across plains and forests. Humans were not masters of these landscapes. They were small figures moving carefully across the stage of a world that was constantly reshaping itself, and in the shadows of these lands, predators moved with stealth and power. The Ice Age was not empty, but alive with creatures as dangerous as they were magnificent. Saber-toothed cats prowled the grasslands, their long fangs glinting as they brought down prey with terrifying efficiency. Cave lions, larger than any lions alive today, hunted in packs, their roars raising through valleys as warnings to all who heard them. Dire wolves, heavier and stronger than the wolves we know, stalked herds and sometimes people, their numbers alone making them formidable. Bears the size of small houses emerged from caves with the thaw, their hunger after long winters making them unpredictable and deadly. Even the mammoth, so often a target of human ingenuity, could turn in an instant from prey to destroyer, its massive bulk capable of crushing those who dared too close. To live in the Ice Age was to exist not at the top of a food chain, but within a circle of predators and prey, where survival meant not only finding nourishment, but also avoiding becoming nourishment for others. Faced with such conditions, the fragility of human life was undeniable. Unlike the creatures around them, humans were not born with thick coats of fur to shield them from cold, nor with claws or fangs to defend themselves, nor with speed or strength to escape danger. A human body was soft, its skin vulnerable to claws and teeth, its flesh easily pierced, its bones easily broken. Illnesses swept through camps, fevers and infections against which there was little defense. A wound that might be trivial today, a cut, a sprain, a broken limb, could prove fatal in the Ice Age, reducing one's ability to hunt, to gather, to contribute to the survival of the group. Infants and children, their bodies small and delicate, faced long odds, and yet their survival was essential for the continuation of the family and tribe. Elders carried knowledge and memory, but were themselves more vulnerable to cold and hunger. To be human in this era was to walk always with awareness of weakness, to recognize that one's place in the natural order was precarious, and yet it was precisely this vulnerability that forged the resilience of humanity. Because they were fragile, Humans learned to build shelters, to clothe themselves in the hides of animals, to invent weapons and tools that extended their reach. Because they could not face predators with strength alone, they learned the value of cooperation, of strategy, of unity in numbers. Because hunger pressed upon them, they learned to store, to plan, to innovate. And because cold threatened always to extinguish them, they learned to tame fire, not just to light their nights but to preserve their lives. In the crucible of the Ice Age, vulnerability became the seed of adaptation. It forced humans to imagine, to create, to bond with one another, in ways that made them not only survivors but innovators. The challenge of survival during the Ice Age cannot be reduced to one enemy. It was a tapestry of threats. The relentless cold, the scarcity of food, the perilous landscapes, the predators who shared the land, and the frailty of the human body itself. Each of these forces shaped humanity in ways both painful and profound. They carved lessons into the human story, lessons of endurance, of creativity, of cooperation. To live in such a world was to live with constant awareness of danger, yet also with constant awareness of possibility, the possibility to adapt, to outthink, to endure. And in that enduring, humans discovered themselves not only as fragile beings in a vast and hostile world, but as creatures capable of transcending their fragility. In the shadows of glaciers, in the echoes of predator calls, in the silence of Tsar-filled nights when hunger gnawed and fires flickered low, humanity learned to be human. In the frozen theatre of the Ice Age, survival demanded not only an ability to endure the hardships of the present moment, but also an innate capacity to change, to adapt, and to transform in ways both subtle and profound. For humans, adaptation was not a single invention or a single discovery. It was a slow layering of strengths, abilities, and habits that together made life possible in a world that seemed constantly poised against them. It is here that the story of our species takes on a different hue from that of the beasts around us. For where the mammoth had tusks and the saber-toothed cat had fangs, the human had the gift of resilience, of ingenuity, of a body and mind capable of more than simple survival. To endure the Ice Age was not only to fight against the cold, but to reshape what it meant to be human, to turn weakness into strength and fragility into adaptation. The human body, though vulnerable in many ways, revealed a resilience that belied its delicate appearance. Though lacking fur, it possessed other gifts. The human ability to sweat, to regulate body temperature through perspiration, may seem trivial today, but in an Ice Age world, this endurance gave hunters an advantage over their prey. Unlike many animals that could sprint with great force but tire quickly, humans could continue moving for hours, even days, across the open steppe. They were persistent hunters, following an animal until its strength waned, until exhaustion set in and the prey could be brought down. It was not speed that gave humans an edge, but stamina, a dogged endurance that allowed them to cross vast distances, to migrate when resources grew scarce, to survive where less adaptable creatures would falter. Bones discovered from our ancestors reveal bodies built for travel, legs long and strong, hips structured for steady walking, feet made not for short bursts, but for the long march of survival. This endurance was not limited to the physical. It extended to the ability to survive long periods of scarcity, to withstand hunger when food was absent, to keep moving even when energy was low. Human metabolism, capable of storing energy in fat, allowed groups to weather lean seasons, while the ability to digest a wide variety of foods from meat to roots to nuts made humans flexible eaters, never entirely dependent on one source of sustenance. Where specialized animals struggled if their preferred food vanished, humans could shift, experiment, test, and find nourishment in unexpected places. This adaptability of diet meant that humans could settle in diverse environments, from the icy tundra of Eurasia to the drier savannas of Africa, carrying with them not just their bodies but a resilience written into their very biology. And yet, the greatest human adaptation lay not only in muscle and bone, but in the brain. While other creatures survived through claws, teeth, or sheer size, humans survived through thought. The Ice Age demanded creativity, and the human brain, already larger than that of many of its primate cousins, expanded further in capacity. With it came memory, imagination, and foresight. The ability to remember where herds had migrated in past seasons, to imagine what might happen if one tried a new hunting strategy, to plan for winters by storing food or fashioning better shelters. This foresight was a profound evolutionary advantage. It allowed humans to live not only in the present moment, but in the possible future, to shape decisions today with an eye on tomorrow. Just as crucial as thought itself was the ability to share thought. Cooperation was a cornerstone of human survival, and language, though still in its earliest forms, was its tool. With words, gestures, and stories, humans could coordinate hunts, warn of dangers, and teach their children skills that had taken lifetimes to learn. A single hunter was vulnerable, but a group, bound by shared communication, could bring down animals far larger than themselves. Cooperation extended beyond hunting into the daily rhythms of survival. Women gathering plants, children learning by watching, elders sharing memories of past winters that guided the group through present challenges. To cooperate was to multiply strength, to become more than the sum of individuals, and this collective resilience gave humans an advantage no predator could match. Cooperation was also bound to empathy. Unlike many creatures that left the weak to fall behind, humans developed the instinct to care for one another. Fossil evidence shows bones healed from breaks that would have rendered a hunter immobile for months. Proof that someone had fed and protected them during their recovery. This compassion was not sentiment alone, it was adaptation. By caring for the injured or the elderly, groups preserved knowledge, skills, and bonds that strengthened their survival. Cooperation created culture, a fabric of shared responsibility that became as vital to survival as fire or stone tools. The brain did not simply give rise to cleverness, it gave rise to community, and in community lay the resilience of the human spirit. Even with endurance and intelligence, the Ice Age demanded new forms of protection, and here the human instinct for innovation revealed itself once more. The nakedness of the human body in such a climate would have been a death sentence without the discovery of coverings. And so early on humans learned to transform the bodies of the animals they hunted into second skins. The hides of reindeer, bison, and mammoth were stripped, tanned, and softened into garments that trapped warmth. Furs with their insulating layers became cloaks, boots, and hoods. Sinews became thread, bone splinters became needles. And from these humble beginnings arose the first true clothing of humankind. To wrap oneself in the warmth of another creature was not only to borrow its protection but to extend human life into climates where bare skin could not endure. These coverings evolved with time. Simple hides draped over shoulders became sewn garments, fitted and layered to shield against wind and snow. Footwear, crafted from soft leather, stuffed with grasses, insulated feet from frozen ground. Caps of fur shielded ears and heads, while cloaks lined with down from birds added extra warmth. In some regions, where resources allowed, humans experimented with layering different hides, combining durability with insulation. The very act of wearing clothing became a uniquely human adaptation, separating people from the natural vulnerability of their bodies, and giving them the freedom to explore new environments, once closed to them. With clothing, the Arctic tundra became survivable. With clothing, the ice was no longer an impassable barrier but a challenge to be met. Clothing also carried cultural weight. Decorations, beads, and dyes sometimes adorned garments, turning mere protection into expressions of identity and meaning. A cloak could tell a story of skill, of status, of belonging to a group. In this way, adaptation was not only practical but symbolic, giving rise to the earliest forms of human culture. What began as necessity became artistry, and in that artistry lay the beginnings of the human drive to create beauty, even in the harshest of times. Together, these adaptations of body, of brain, of cooperation, of coverings, paint the picture of a species that survived not because it was the strongest, but because it was the most adaptable. The Ice Age did not bend to the will of humans. Humans bent themselves to the Ice Age, molding body and mind into tools of survival. Physical resilience allowed them to endure long hunts and harsh climates. Intelligence and cooperation allowed them to plan, to share, to innovate. Clothing transformed weakness into strength, turning vulnerability into a form of power. Each adaptation was a response to hardship,
but each also laid the foundation for what humanity would become. In the end, it was not one single adaptation that carried humans through, but the weaving of many together, forming a net that caught them when the world threatened to let them fall. The Ice Age did not crush humanity, it forged it, and in the flickering firelight of a cave, wrapped in the skins of hunted beasts, voices whispering plans for tomorrow, one can almost hear the quiet triumph of a species learning not just to endure, but to thrive. The Ice Age was not merely a trial of hunger or the pursuit of prey, it was a long test of warmth, of protection against the endless cold that seeped into bone and marrow. In those vast stretches of frozen earth where winds screamed across the tundra and the night seemed longer than the day, survival was measured not only in calories found but in warmth preserved. The human body, so exposed without fur, so delicate against biting winds, needed a second skin, and through ingenuity and necessity, early humans turned to the very creatures they hunted. Animal skins and furs became shields against winter, wrapping fragile flesh in a cocoon of insulation. It was not a sudden invention, but a gradual transformation, an understanding drawn from trial, observation and desperation, that a pelt was more than a trophy, that a hide was more than waste, that in the warmth of other creatures lay the secret of life in the cold. The process began with the simplest act, draping the fresh hide of a kill across the shoulders. At first crude and temporary, these coverings carried the animal's warmth for a short while, buying time against frost. But humans are not content with makeshift solutions. They adapt, refine and improve. Soon hides were scraped clean of flesh, stretched to dry, and softened to avoid stiffness. Women and men, patient and meticulous, learned to rub fat and marrow into the hides, preserving their suppleness, while smoke from fires cured them against decay. Over time, this knowledge became ritual, a practice passed from one generation to the next, until clothing was no longer a temporary trick, but a refined craft. In this way, necessity birthed skill, and skill birthed survival. With sharpened bones shaped into needles and strips of sinew twisted into thread, humans took a step further, cutting hides into shapes and sewing them together. The first true garments emerged, tunics that covered the torso, leggings that protected the legs, moccasins stuffed dust-dry grasses to insulate the feet, hoods framed faces against the bite of the wind, while mittens layered and tied, shielded hands needed for work. Archaeological traces of these inventions reveal astonishing complexity. The seams sewn inside out to protect them from unraveling, the layering of different hides for balance between durability and insulation. Each garment was not only protection but innovation, reflecting both necessity and creativity. Different animals provided different gifts. Reindeer hides, lightweight yet insulating, were prized for mobility, while mammoth hides, thick and heavy, became outer layers against the harshest storms. The soft pelts of foxes and hares lined garments, cushioning and warming against the cold, while the furs of wolves or bears, imposing and luxurious, may have carried symbolic meaning as well as warmth. In the shimmer of firelight, a hunter draped in wolfskin was not only insulated, but cloaked in the essence of the predator itself, the spirit of survival turned into garment. In this way, clothing became more than function. It became an expression of identity, of strength, of belonging. Clothing, however, was only part of the story. To endure an Ice Age world, one needed more than garments. One needed places of refuge. The open tundra, barren and windswept, offered little mercy, and humans turned to the landscape itself to find shelter. Natural caves, carved by water and time into hillsides and cliffs, became sanctuaries. These caves, deep and cool in summer, dry and insulated in winter, sheltered families from both weather and predators. Within them, fires lit the darkness, their smoke curling upward into cracks and vents. Walls, rough and uneven, became canvases where human hands painted animals, hunts and dreams. Here, among the echoes of stone, humans not only found protection but began to shape spaces of meaning, transforming caves into homes, into places where the human story was recorded in ochre and charcoal. Yet not all groups lived near caves, and ingenuity pushed humans to construct their own shelters. Huts of wood and bone arose on the plains,
framed by mammoth tusks and ribs, covered with hides and earth. In Ukraine and Siberia, remains of such mammoth bone dwellings have been discovered, their circular form suggesting communities that gathered in these sturdy shelters to share warmth and food. These structures were not crude improvisations but careful constructions, their frameworks engineered to withstand winds, their coverings layered for insulation. Grass and moss sealed cracks, while stones held hides in place. Inside, fire pits glowed at the center, smoke venting through carefully designed openings. These homes, both humble and monumental, spoke of a people who refused to bow to the cold, who turned the bones of giants into walls, who carved survival out of ingenuity. In colder regions still, where wood was scarce and stone lay buried beneath ice, humans found yet another solution: shelters of snow itself. Packed snow, cut into blocks, became the material for domes we would later call igloos, their curved walls trapping heat within. To step inside such a structure was to feel a silence and warmth entirely different from the howling winds outside. Snow, the very emblem of cold, became paradoxically a protector, an insulator that held life within its crystalline grip. Though temporary, these shelters allowed mobility, giving hunters refuge on journeys across frozen expanses. They were reminders of the profound lesson of the Ice Age, that even the harshest materials could be transformed into tools of survival. But no form of shelter, no garment of fur, could fully defend against the chill without fire. Fire was the breath of warmth in a breathless world, the light in the long dark, the protector of life itself. To master fire was to master survival, and humans guarded it with reverence. At first, fire was borrowed from nature, captured from lightning strikes or volcanic eruptions, carried carefully in smouldering branches, kept alive as embers through the night. But with time came the skill to kindle it, striking flint against stone, coaxing sparks into flames with tinder of dry grasses and bark. The mastery of fire was not only an act of survival but an act of creation, transforming cold into warmth, raw flesh into cooked food, night into a place of light and safety. Around fires, communities formed. Flames became the heart of the shelter, the center of the circle where families gathered, where stories were told, where songs were sung. Fire was warmth, but it was also protection. The glow deterred predators, the smoke drove away insects, the embers dried wet hides and tools, fire hardened wooden spears, turning them into more durable weapons. And in its light, humans discovered the alchemy of transformation, where stone could be tempered and meat made safer to eat. The relationship between humans and fire was intimate, symbiotic. In its flickering dance, people saw not only survival, but mystery, reverence, even spirituality. Fire was alive, a being to be respected, to be feared, to be cherished. In the coldest nights of the Ice Age, when winds howled and snow buried the world in silence, fire was the thin line between life and death. It was more than a tool, it was a companion, a teacher, a symbol of the human ability to wrest life from a hostile world, to sit by the flames, wrapped in furs, sheltered by cave or hut, was to feel for a moment that the Ice Age could be endured, that humanity had found a way not only to resist extinction, but to thrive. Clothing, shelter, fire, these were not mere technologies. They were manifestations of adaptation, of creativity, of the human refusal to surrender. They were the building blocks of culture, of community, of the very essence of civilization. And so, in the grand story of the Ice Age, these inventions were not background details, but central acts in the drama of survival. Without clothing, the cold would have stripped life from the body. Without shelter, storms and predators would have crushed the fragile existence of scattered groups. Without fire, the long night would have been endless, unforgiving, fatal. Together they wove a cocoon of warmth around humanity, a fragile but resilient armor against the age of ice. They turned a world of danger into a world of possibility, and in their glow and warmth, the first sparks of the human story of culture, community and continuity were born. The world of the Ice Age was alive with giants, creatures that seemed to have stepped out of myths long before myths themselves were told. Across the frozen plains and windswept valleys moved enormous shapes, woolly mammoths, trudging through drifts of snow, herds of bison pressing forward like dark rivers against the horizon, saber-toothed cats lying in wait with eyes that burned like twin embers in the dusk. For the humans who lived then, these animals were not simply background scenery in their daily struggle. They were at the very heart of existence, woven into every decision, every journey, every prayer whispered into the icy air. They represented both nourishment and danger, abundance and loss, challenge and reward. To survive meant to understand them, to respect their rhythms, and to weave one's fragile human life into the broader fabric of theirs. When a mammoth appeared, it was like a mountain that moved. Towering above humans, its woolly coat hung in thick mats of brown and russet, clumps of snow and ice clinging to the hair as it swayed with each step. The tusks curved outward and up in graceful arcs, spiraled like crescents of ivory that gleamed when caught by pale winter sunlight. Beneath its massive skull, the trunk swung constantly, snuffling in the snow, blowing out clouds of vapor, probing for grasses buried under ice. Even from a distance, the smell of a mammoth lingered in the air, musky and earthy, heavy with the weight of the beast's body. For hunters, that smell was both invitation and warning, a promise of food and hides, and a reminder of the peril that came with approaching such power. A single mammoth could sustain an entire band of people for weeks. Its meat was dense with fat, critical fuel against the burning cold. The hide, once stripped and cleaned, could be stitched into clothing, or layered to create insulation for a shelter. The tusks and bones became tools, weapons, even frames for huts when lashed together with sinew. In truth, a mammoth was more than an animal. It was a treasure chest of survival, but it was also a test, one that required skill, patience, and courage. To bring one down was to pit fragile flesh against monumental weight. It was to plan, to stalk, to wait for the right moment, when the massive beast's steps slowed or its herd left a straggler behind. Hunters watched herds from afar, crouching in the cold, their breath forming small clouds as they whispered strategies. They saw how mammoths moved together, circling their young in protective rings when threatened, how they lifted their trunks and trumpeted warnings that echoed across the plains. They knew that to rush at such a herd was folly. Instead, they searched for weakness, an old bull with cracked tusks, a lame female limping at the edge, a calf separated in panic. They used the land as an ally, guiding mammoths toward swamps that clutched at their legs, toward ravines where footing was treacherous, or toward pits dug in frozen earth covered with branches and snow. These traps were not perfect, but they tilted the odds, giving fragile humans a chance to strike against something that otherwise seemed invincible. When the moment of attack came, it was chaos wrapped in determination. Spears tipped with sharpened stone or hardened bone flew through the air, striking against hide that was tough as leather, sinking into flesh with slow resistance. Hunters ran in circles, shouting, waving torches, trying to keep the beast off balance. Sometimes the mammoth charged, tusks sweeping wide, a hunter crushed beneath its hooves, bones snapping like brittle twigs. Sometimes it turned and tried to flee, wounded and bellowing, blood steaming as it hit the snow. The pursuit could last hours, even days, a relentless wearing down of strength until the beast staggered and collapsed. And when it fell, when the ground shook with the final crash of its body, there was silence, then shouts, songs, cries of relief that mixed grief with triumph. For the death of a mammoth was not only victory, but sacrifice, a moment in which humans felt both gratitude and awe at what the world had yielded. Even in death, the mammoth was not simply a resource. Its presence carried into stories, into the minds of children who listened to tales by the fire. The mammoth became a symbol of endurance, of strength hidden beneath layers of cold, of generosity and danger entwined. In carvings etched into tusks and cave walls, mammoths appeared again and again, drawn with arcs and curves, their long tusks exaggerated, their bodies massive. They were remembered not just as prey but as teachers of survival, as beings whose lives and deaths shaped the path of humanity. If mammoths were the mountains of the plains, then bison were the rivers, moving together in dark, thundering currents across the tundra. A herd of bison was a force of nature, hundreds of shaggy backs swaying together, horns jutting forward, hooves pounding against frozen ground with a rhythm that shook the earth. They grazed on the grasses that managed to grow in patches beneath snow, their heads pushing aside frost, their breaths rising in misty clouds. Unlike mammoths, bison were not solitary giants but masses of power, numbers that overwhelmed the landscape. For humans, this meant both opportunity and danger. For where there were many animals, there was abundance, yet also the risk of being swallowed by the chaos of a stampede. To hunt bison required more than bravery. It required orchestration, a harmony of voices, movements, and strategies. Hunters did not simply face the herd. They guided it, manipulated its instincts. They learned how bison flowed away from pressure, how they followed the movement of leaders, how they could be startled into running where the hunters wished. With cries and waving arms, with fire and noise, groups of hunters drove bison toward ravines or cliffs, where the momentum of the herd became its own undoing. Archaeological sites reveal places where dozens, even hundreds of bison fell together, their bones layered in heaps, evidence of coordinated hunts that must have fed entire communities for months. The moment of the stampede was both terrifying and exhilarating. The ground trembled under pounding hooves, the air filled with dust and snow, the roar of animals merging into something like thunder. Hunters darted alongside, urging the herd forward, careful to stay clear of horns and hooves that could kill in an instant. Then came the cries as the first animals stumbled, the collective crash of bodies piling against each other, a frenzy of movement slowing into stillness. In that aftermath, as the survivors scattered and silence returned, the hunters approached with spears and knives, finishing what nature had begun. The bounty of such a hunt was immense. Meat was stripped and dried, fat rendered into stores of fuel, hides stretched and cured, bones became needles, awls, weapons. Every part of the animal was used, nothing wasted. And yet, just as with mammoths, the bison were not only food, but part of human imagination. Their power, their numbers, their sheer presence became symbols of vitality and abundance. In cave paintings, bison appear again and again, their massive forms depicted with careful detail, sometimes pierced by spears, sometimes standing proudly as if embodying the spirit of survival itself. Yet, if mammoths and bison represented the gifts of the Ice Age, saber-toothed cats embodied its shadow. These predators, with their muscular frames and jaws lined by long curved fangs, were the stuff of nightmare. They lurked in forests, crouched in tall grasses, waiting for the moment to strike. Their bodies were built for ambush, for sudden explosive attacks that left prey little time to react. To face one was to face death, made flesh, a predator whose very teeth seemed designed to pierce the neck and sever life in an instant. For humans, saber-toothed cats were not just competitors for prey, they were direct threats, reminders that humans too were part of the food chain. Imagine the fear of a hunter who, returning alone from checking traps, suddenly felt the silence of the forest shift, the sound of snow crunching behind him. Turning, he might glimpse a shadow moving low to the ground, the glint of eyes, the soft growl that vibrated in the chest more than it sounded in the air. Spears were raised, stones clutched, but the knowledge lingered that against such a beast, weapons might not be enough. To survive meant to rely on others, to shout for help, to light torches, to drive the predator back with numbers and noise. Stories of these encounters became warnings, passed down to children. Never wander far alone, never let the fire die at night, always keep watch on the edges of camp. Despite the terror they inspired, saber-toothed cats also earned a place in human imagination. Their strength, their mystery, their predatory grace made them figures of respect as much as fear. To some, they may have been seen as guardians of the wild, embodiments of danger that kept humans humble. Their images appear carved into bone, scratched into stone, symbols of a world where survival was never guaranteed, where humans had to constantly prove their right to live. Together, mammoths, bison, and saber-toothed cats created the stage upon which the human drama of survival unfolded. They dictated where people moved, how they hunted, what stories they told, what fears they carried. These animals were not separate from human life, they were interwoven into it, shaping not only diets and shelters but identities and beliefs. To walk the plains of the Ice Age was to walk in their shadow, to feel their presence at every turn, to recognize that the fragile thread of human life was bound tightly to the immense tapestry of theirs. And in this way, the great animals of the Ice Age were more than flesh and bone. They were teachers, rivals, companions in the struggle against the cold. They demanded respect, inspired innovation, and filled the nights with stories. Long after their bones sank into the earth, and their forms vanished from the world, they remained alive in the human spirit, etched into memory, painted on cave walls, whispered in legends. For without them, humanity might never have become what it is. In facing the giants of ice and fang, people learned not only how to survive, but how to imagine, how to cooperate, how to endure. The mammoth, the bison, the saber-toothed cat, each in their own way, carried humanity forward into the future, leaving a legacy carved into both earth and soul. The first humans who braved the cold expanses of the Ice Age did not walk into that world with empty hands. In their palms they carried sharpness chipped from stone, edges born from countless strikes of rock against rock. These were not weapons in the way we imagine spears of bronze or iron, polished and gleaming, but they were power nonetheless. The earliest companions of human hands, shaped by intention and patience. Imagine a figure crouched by a riverbank, fingers stiff from the chill, striking one stone against another, listening to the rhythm of impact, watching slivers of flint fall away like sparks of possibility. Each strike was an act of vision, of seeing not only what the stone was, but what it could become. A blade that could slice hide, a point that could pierce flesh, a scraper that could separate fat from bone. These stone tools were simple in form, yet they contained in them the seed of human resilience. A shard of flint, sharp as glass, could change the outcome of a hunt, determine whether a family ate or starved. A carefully knapped hand axe could open the frozen carcass of a bison, crack bones to reach marrow rich and fat. The hands that shaped them carried knowledge passed through generations, a rhythm of blows, an eye for the fracture lines that ran through stone, an understanding of how a core could be reduced into useful flake. Such skills were not taught in words alone, but through watching, through listening, through the feel of stone against skin, through the echo of rock clashing against rock. Around fires and under open skies, young eyes followed the movements of elders, and with time they too learned how to coax an edge out of silence. Stone points became extensions of human will, bound to shafts of wood with sinew and resin. They transformed sticks into spears, giving reach to arms that were otherwise frail against the bulk of mammoths and bison. Spears gave distance, allowed hunters to strike while still holding space between themselves and the dangerous power of hooves and tusks. The earliest spears were thrusting weapons, meant to be driven into prey at close range, demanding courage and precision. Imagine the pounding heart of a hunter stepping forward toward a charging beast, bracing as the spear met the weight of muscle, the point sinking in with resistance, the shaft bending under pressure. Such moments were tests of nerve as much as of skill, but they also carried the first glimpses of strategy, of humans learning to amplify their reach beyond their bodies. Over time, the design of spears grew more refined. Hafting, the joining of stone points to wooden shafts, became an art in itself. Hunters split the ends of branches, set in flaked blades, and bound them tight with animal sinew, glue made from boiled hooves, or resin drawn from trees. The binding had to hold against impact, resist the tearing strain of flesh, withstand the cold that made fibers brittle. A weapon made poorly might shatter in a crucial moment. One made well could be used again and again, a faithful tool of survival. Around hearths, hunters inspected their spears, testing the bindings, running fingers over the edges, sharpening points with care. To tend one's weapons was as necessary as tending one's fire, for in their absence, hunger and danger pressed too close. But humans did not stop at thrusting spears. Their minds sought ways to strike from farther away, to lessen risk while still delivering power. Thus came the innovation of the spear thrower, or tlat, a carved liver of wood or bone that extended the arm, giving force and speed to a thrown spear. With this tool, a hunter could send a projectile whistling through the air, striking prey at a distance beyond what muscle alone could achieve. The atlatl was not merely a technical advance. It was a transformation of relationship between hunter and hunted. It allowed humans to remain safer, to wound from afar, to turn the balance slightly more in their favor against beasts far stronger than themselves. The sound of a spear slicing through wind, loosed from an atlatl, carried with it both survival and a new kind of confidence. The making of stone tools was never static. As thousands of years passed, shapes shifted, methods evolved. In some places, blades grew longer, more symmetrical, flaked with striking precision into points so delicate that modern archaeologists marvel at their craftsmanship. In other regions, scrapers became refined, edges shaped to work hides with greater efficiency. The story of stone tools is not one of stagnation, but of constant adaptation, mirroring the humans who made them. The cold demanded new answers, new designs, new ways of bending nature to human need, and each flake of stone that fell from a core was a record of thought, of intention, of the human drive to solve problems not only with strength, but with creativity. The rhythm of stone working was also the rhythm of community. Knapping flint was loud, the crack of impact echoing across valleys, announcing presence to all nearby. Groups gathered to work stone together, sharing cores, passing flakes, watching edges emerge. In these gatherings, knowledge flowed invisibly, passed not only through deliberate instruction, but through the simple act of doing side by side. Younger ones watched the angle of a blow, the twist of a wrist, the patient repetition required to achieve a symmetrical edge. The making of tools became a language in itself, a way of speaking across generations, of carrying memory through time without words etched in script. Stone tools and spears also shaped human imagination. They were more than utilities. They were symbols of identity, of belonging to the humankind that shaped the earth with thought and craft. A spear carried by a hunter was not only wood and stone, but a declaration of ability, of readiness to face the dangers of the Ice Age world. Blades etched with marks, handles carved with patterns, points carefully polished, all revealed that tools could carry meaning beyond function. They were objects of pride, of artistry, of connection between hand, mind, and work. In moments of quiet, after hunts were over and fires burned low, hunters may have sat and run their fingers over the edges of their weapons, feeling the sharpness, reflecting on the lives taken with them, on the lives saved. The spear was a reminder of fragility, that without it, flesh was exposed, vulnerable to cold, hunger, predators. Yet it was also a reminder of possibility, that with thought and effort, humans could extend themselves beyond their limits. The Ice Age was long, and across its millennia, tools shifted shape as humans migrated, as climates shifted, as herds moved, and rivers froze or thawed. Yet the continuity of stone and spear endured, a thread that linked distant generations, from the first flakes struck from river pebbles, to the carefully hafted spear points buried with hunters in graves. The story was one of persistence, of craft growing alongside humanity itself. Stone and wood and sinew became bridges between the frailty of flesh and the enormity of the world, and in those bridges lay survival, and in survival lay the seeds of everything that would follow. When one imagines the Ice Age family traveling together across the endless tundra, it is not difficult to see the extraordinary choreography of cooperation that underpinned every step. The smallest children were carried, wrapped tightly in furs, secured against the hips or backs of their mothers, aunties, or older siblings. Their muffled cries were answered with soft murmurs, gentle rocking, small touches that reassured both child and parent in a world where silence could stretch for days, broken only by the wind's whistle. Older children, though still young, were taught early to walk beside the group, to watch where the snow gave way beneath their feet, to copy the pace of adults. When fatigue overcame them, a cousin or uncle might lift them onto shoulders for a while, the child's laughter rising even against the biting air. In these moments we see that care was not limited to one nuclear unit, extended outward, braided together into the larger body of the tribe, ensuring that every child could grow strong enough to one day take their place in the long cycle of survival. There were rituals for travel. Before setting out, the tribe gathered their belongings, carefully knapped flint blades, stone scrapers, bone awls, precious fire-starting materials, carried in hide pouches. Families did not guard their possessions jealously, for everyone understood that what belonged to one belonged to all. A woman might lend her best sewing needle to another, trusting that when her own garment tore in the deep cold, someone else would stitch it for her. The burden of carrying was also distributed, not according to rigid hierarchy, but according to strength, age, and endurance. Elders walked more slowly, supported by staffs or by the hands of their children and grandchildren. Yet these elders carried not only their share of tools or food, but also the stories and knowledge that sustained the group. Without them, the family was adrift. Around the fire, community life came alive in a rhythm of sharing. Imagine the flicker of flames casting shadows against a cave wall, or dancing across the hide of a tent. The meat of the day's hunt roasted on spits, dripping fat that hissed when it struck the fire. The smell was intoxicating, filling the cramped shelter with warmth and hunger. No one ate alone. The choicest pieces were given to children, to elders, to nursing mothers, for their health secured the future of the band. Hunters might eat last, not in resentment, but in recognition that strength must flow where it was needed most. Archaeological evidence shows butchery marks on bones divided evenly, sometimes even on scarce resources like marrow-rich long bones, which suggests that food was apportioned with fairness, not hoarded in secret. Children learned through watching. They sat near their parents or uncles as tools were made, watching the precise strike of a flint knapper's hand, the careful pressure applied to shape a spearhead. Sometimes they were handed broken flakes to play with, to mimic the motions, their small fingers fumbling until one day they could strike with precision. In play they absorbed survival, games with miniature spears, mock hunts in the snow, mimicry of adult work. All of these ensured that skills passed down as naturally as language, and just as skills were taught, so were values. Fairness, cooperation, patience, these were not abstract concepts but lived necessities. A selfish child might hoard food, but quickly they learned through gentle correction or stern rebuke that selfishness was dangerous. If one hoarded, all might perish. If one shared, all could endure. There is something profoundly human in the way love itself became a survival mechanism. Romantic bonds, tender gestures between mates, not luxuries but essential glues that held groups steady. The embrace of lovers at night brought not only comfort but literal warmth, and the security of partnership meant children were raised with two protectors instead of one. The archaeological record gives us tantalizing glimpses. Graves where pairs were buried together, their bodies aligned as though in eternal closeness. Carvings of female figures, symbols of fertility and the continuity of life, passed between hands that knew how precious the bond of reproduction was. Love stories, unrecorded yet surely abundant, were whispered in the glow of embers, carried forward into descendants who still know the sweetness of companionship. Even in hardship, the fabric of family endured. Famine pressed cruelly upon Ice Age communities, when the herds changed their migration routes, or when snow lay too thick to dig for roots. In these times, it was not strength alone that saved them, but mutual sacrifice. Parents might eat less to leave food for children. Elders might step back, consuming sparingly, so the young could grow. Archaeological studies of skeletal remains show signs of malnutrition in adults, while children's bones sometimes appear healthier, a silent testament to the sacrifices made by parents and grandparents. Such choices did not emerge from detached calculation, but from love and instinct, the family ensuring its line would continue, even at personal cost. We can also imagine moments of celebration in the lean landscape of the Ice Age. Joy was not absent. When hunts succeeded beyond expectation, or when families reunited after long migrations, there must have been dancing, singing, perhaps even feasting that bordered on extravagance. Ethnographic parallels from hunter-gatherer societies suggest that music, drumming, and rhythmic movement played central roles in communal bonding. Around the fire, voices rose together, chants and songs, echoing into the cold night, filling the air with human sound that defied the silence of snow. Children clapped, elders swayed, and for a few hours, fear and hunger retreated under the spell of unity. There is archaeological evidence to support this vision of festivity. At certain Ice Age sites, archaeologists have found collections of perforated animal teeth and shells, worn as necklaces or jingling ornaments. These were not tools but adornments, symbols of identity and perhaps status, but also sources of beauty and sound. A child might have laughed to hear the rattle of a necklace, just as today children delight in playthings. A woman's beads might have clicked as she danced by the fire. These objects remind us that community was not only about survival, but also about expression, about joy found even in hardship. Conflict, too, had its place. No human group is free from disagreement, and the stress of hunger or injury surely sharpened tempers. Yet in such small communities, where everyone's survival depended on everyone else's labor, conflict resolution was essential. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer bands note that disputes are often eased by humor, by the intervention of elders, or by rituals that allow anger to be released without breaking bonds. We can imagine similar practices among Ice Age families. Perhaps stories were told to shame selfishness. Perhaps songs or dances mocked quarrels, until laughter dissolved tension. The deep need to remain together ensured that cooperation prevailed over division. At times, bands must have grown too large for the resources of a given area. Then came the hard choice to split. Families separated, moving in different directions, following different herds or rivers. These moments must have been bittersweet. Cousins hugging goodbye, lovers parted, elders shedding tears as they blessed the younger ones, setting out. But such divisions were not permanent. Seasonal gatherings often reunited these bands, allowing new alliances, marriages, and exchanges. The rhythm of separation and reunion was part of life's cadence, expanding the circle of kinship across a wider landscape. Archaeological discoveries offer glimpses into these gatherings. At mammoth bone settlement sites in Ukraine, the sheer size of the structures suggests more than one family lived together for extended periods. The construction of large circular dwellings required dozens of individuals working in unison, a level of cooperation beyond a single household. These were communities bound not only by necessity but by choice, pooling labor to create homes that stood against the cold. Within those walls, laughter must have echoed, babies cried, arguments sparked, and reconciliation followed. The bones of mammoths formed not only walls but the architecture of community itself. Beyond survival, community gave meaning. Burial practices show deliberate acts of remembrance. The red ochre sprinkled on the dead was not needed for practical reasons. It was symbolic. Shell beads sewn onto clothing, animal bones arranged beside bodies, even the occasional carved figurine placed in graves. These speak of love, memory, and the acknowledgement of individuality. Families remembered their dead, tribes honored their members, and in doing so they created a sense of continuity that transcended death. The Ice Age world was filled with loss, yet the act of remembering ensured that no one vanished entirely. It is this intertwining of survival and love, of necessity and tenderness, that defines the family and tribal groups of the Ice Age. They were not simply pragmatic clusters of humans clinging together for warmth. They were communities of affection, of ritual, of memory, of laughter and song. They endured the cruelty of the glacial world because they turned to one another, creating a circle of humanity against the vast impersonal cold. When the wind howled outside and predators prowled in the night, the fire burned brighter because it was surrounded by faces, by hands that held each other, by voices that spoke stories to keep fear at bay. And so the family, the tribe, the group, these were the true tools of survival, more enduring than any spear, more powerful than any fire. Long after mammoths vanished, after glaciers melted and the world changed, the essence of those bonds remained. Even today, when we gather in circles of our own, around dining tables, in classrooms, in communities large and small, we are continuing the legacy of the Ice Age family, still answering the ancient truth that to survive, to truly live, is to belong to one another. The endless plains stretched beneath a pale, glimmering sky, a vast expanse of frozen earth where the horizon was broken only by the dark, slow-moving silhouettes of animals. To the Ice Age hunter, these shapes were not just distant figures but lifelines. Each massive step of the mammoth pressed deep into the snow, leaving a trail wide enough for a child to walk within. Each plume of breath a reminder that here was warmth and sustenance in a world otherwise cold and spare. Families moved when the herds moved, for the great beasts carried with them not only meat but fat, hide, bone, sinew, and a promise of life through another brutal season. Survival was written into the footprints of animals, and so the people followed, as faithfully as rivers follow their course to the sea. To understand migration in the Ice Age, one must first understand hunger. The land did not offer itself freely. Edible plants were scarce in the deep cold, roots locked beneath frozen soil, berries fleeting in their brief summer blush. Small game could be trapped, birds caught, fish pulled from icy rivers. But these were not enough to feed entire bands of people. The true bounty lay in the great herds, reindeer, in their tens of thousands sweeping across tundra, steppe bison clustered in thick bands, mammoths trudging in steady lines that echoed through generations. To live was to move with them, shadowing their paths across valleys and plains, learning the routes as intimately as one might know the veins in a hand. These journeys were not aimless wanderings, but carefully attuned rhythms. Elders remembered when and where the herds appeared, knowledge etched into memory and repeated in story and song, so the young would never forget. A tribe might camp near a river crossing where reindeer returned each year, their migration as reliable as the turning of the stars. Another band might follow the mammoth trails, learning to read the churned earth where the giants had passed, or the trampled snow where bison pressed through narrow passes. The people were not passive. They studied the movements, anticipating where animals would graze, where they would calve, where they would fall weak in deep snow. Migration was not only pursuit, but partnership, a fragile balance of hunter and hunted, as though humanity's destiny was tethered to the breath of the beasts. Picture a band of Ice Age families breaking camp at dawn. The fire is little more than glowing embers, carefully collected to be carried in a skin pouch so that sparks will not be lost. Children are bundled, belongings tied to sleds pulled by dogs, or by people themselves, every possession precious and portable. The scouts set out first, reading the signs, dung still steaming in the cold, tufts of hair caught on branches, the faint, musky scent of a herd carried on the wind. The direction is chosen not by chance but by evidence, by centuries of accumulated knowledge whispered from one generation to the next. And when the silhouettes of animals appear against the horizon, excitement rises, not in cries or shouts, for noise could scatter the herd, but in the quickening of breath, the tightening of grips on spears, the gleam in weary eyes that no food is near. But the chase was never simple. Herds moved across landscapes indifferent to human need. Rivers swelled with meltwater. Cliffs loomed where the plains narrowed. Storms swept down without warning to scatter hunters and prey alike. To follow was to endure hardship, feet bleeding from long marches, bellies gnawed by hunger when the herd moved faster than people could keep pace, minds sharpened by the constant awareness of predators who also followed the animals, wolves, cave lions, saber-toothed cats. To be a hunter was to be one predator among many, competing not only with beasts but with the cold itself. And yet, the rewards were profound. When a hunt succeeded, it was as though the earth itself had yielded. A mammoth brought down meant months of survival, perhaps epon feasting. The hides became tents and clothing, the fat precious fuel for lamps, the bones shaped into tools and structures. Nothing was wasted. For to waste was to insult both the animal and the community's fragile balance with nature. The hunt was not only practical, but spiritual. Evidence carved into ivory and etched onto cave walls tells us that these animals were revered, their forms repeated in art that may have been prayers, charms, or records. To follow the herds was to engage in a sacred dance, one that acknowledged dependence while celebrating the great cycle of life. Imagine for a moment a full seasonal migration. In late spring, when the ice retreats and tender shoots of grass push through thawing soil, the reindeer gather in massive herds, restless, driven north by instincts older than memory. Families of humans stir with them, breaking their winter camps in caves or makeshift shelters, setting out across rivers swollen with meltwater. The journey is grueling. Ice chunks float downstream, turning crossings into deadly gambles. Children are carried on shoulders or sleds. Elders lean on staffs, their eyes fixed on the shifting horizon. By summer they reach open tundra, where the reindeer calve. Here, the hunters wait, for the young and the weak fall behind, easier to catch. Summer is a time of relative abundance. Fresh meat, marrow-rich bones, the rare delight of eggs and berries gathered in the brief bloom. Spirits lift, songs are sung, but always the hunters watch the herds, knowing they will not linger. As autumn approaches, the herds turn southward again, sensing the coming cold. The people follow, driving them toward narrow valleys where traps are set, where spears fly from many hands at once. The air is filled with the sound of pounding hooves, the cries of animals and hunters mingled in a storm of motion. Some hunts end in triumph, with meat enough to preserve for the winter ahead. Others end in tragedy, a hunter gored by a bison's horn, a child lost in the chaos, a storm breaking mid-hunt to scatter both prey and people. But still, they rise and try again, because to follow the herds is the only way forward. Winter camps are built from the remains of the hunt, bones and hides lashed into huts, fires fed with fat and wood gathered before the snows. And then, as the year turns once more, the cycle begins again, as steady and unrelenting as the march of stars. Archaeological traces of these lives lie buried in the earth, silent witnesses to migrations long past. At Dolní Věstonice, in what is now the Czech Republic, the remains of mammoth bone dwellings speak of repeated seasonal hunts, shelters built from the very animals that sustained life. In northern Spain and France, cave paintings of bison and deer shimmer with vitality, their movement captured in flickering firelight suggesting not only memory but reverence. In Siberia, ancient kill sites reveal mammoth bones piled together, evidence of communal hunts that required planning, cooperation, and immense courage. And in North America, the Clovis culture left behind spear points buried deep in mammoth ribs, proof that even newly arrived humans quickly learned the rhythm of the great herds. It was in these long marches that human culture deepened. Around fires, children heard tales of past hunts, their imaginations filled with visions of colossal beasts and daring ancestors. They learned to read the land, to tell from the bent grass the direction of a herd, to know from the quality of dung how recently animals had passed, to feel in the air the change of season that would alter the migration's course. These lessons were survival, but they were also identity. To belong to a tribe was to belong to its knowledge, its shared memory of paths across the earth, its inherited wisdom of how to follow and when to strike. To follow the herds was to live in constant movement, a rhythm of hunger and plenty, of loss and abundance. It created resilience, shaping bodies to endure long marches, sharpening minds to solve problems under pressure, fostering cooperation as the only way to bring down giants. It demanded trust in one another, and in the unseen cycles of nature, and it instilled awe for the animals, for the landscapes, for the mysteries of survival, in a world so harsh and yet so abundant, for those who knew how to read its signs. Even today, echoes of those ancient migrations remain in us. The restlessness that drives us to move, to travel, to seek new horizons, is perhaps the same instinct that once made our ancestors rise at dawn, pack their few belongings, and set out across the frozen steppe behind the distant silhouettes of reindeer and mammoth. The Ice Age may have ended, but the memory of movement lives on, a legacy written in every step we take, a whisper of the herds still calling us forward. In the dim glow of a flickering fire, the shadows of human hands danced against the cold, damp walls of a cave, stretching and shrinking with the rhythm of breath and flame. The world outside was vast, frozen and perilous, a landscape of ice and wind, where survival demanded constant vigilance and tireless effort. Yet inside these shelters the first stirrings of imagination, reflection, and expression unfolded, and humans, confronted with the enormity of their existence, began to leave traces of themselves, not merely practical tools or hearths, but marks of thought, spirit, and creativity. Cave walls, rocks, and carved bones became canvases, vessels of memory, and expressions of awe. The earliest cave paintings were not frivolous decoration, they were acts of intention and care. In Lascaux, Altamira, Charlevoix, and numerous other sites across Europe, images of bison, mammoths, reindeer, and horses leap from the rock, as though alive. They are rendered with an astonishing sense of movement, perspective, and vitality. Red ochre, charcoal, and manganese black were painstakingly gathered, mixed and applied with fingers, brushes of hair, or even by blowing pigment through hollow bones to create soft, diffused edges. Each stroke required preparation, skill, and time, precious resources in a world where firewood, food, and warmth were never guaranteed. The decision to create art was deliberate, a testament to the value humans placed on recording the world, interpreting it, and transforming experience into image. These paintings were more than imitation, they were communication, stories in pigment and shadow. Hunters could study the representation of a reindeer herd, noting the positions of the legs, the strength of the horns, perhaps even the timing of migration captured from repeated observation. The images taught, inspired, and reminded the tribe of lessons too subtle to convey in words alone. Yet alongside practical function, there was unmistakable wonder. To gaze upon the elegant curve of a horse or the sinew of a running bison was to see not just a creature, but a reflection of life, an acknowledgement of forces larger than oneself. Humans of the Ice Age were aware of their fragility, and through art they confronted it, celebrated it, and perhaps gained a sense of mastery over a threatening world. Carvings too held profound significance. Small figurines, often depicting women, were sculpted from ivory, bone, or soft stone. Some emphasize exaggerated fertility features, hinting at an understanding of life cycles and the crucial importance of reproduction. Others depict animals with careful anatomical precision, perhaps capturing the essence of prey they hunted, or animals they revered. At sites like Dolní Věstonice, the Venus figurines suggest not merely aesthetic appreciation, but ritualistic or symbolic meaning, tokens of hope, protection, or prayers for abundance. To carve one's vision into a tangible object was to exert influence over the invisible forces of survival, to leave a mark in a world that might otherwise erase every human trace. The process of creating art was itself communal. Families or tribal groups often worked together, with one person holding the lamp, another mixing pigments, another painting or carving, and children observing intently at the edges. These were lessons, apprenticeships in observation, skill, and tradition. A child watching a mother's hand sweep across a wall absorbed knowledge that would later guide them in hunting, crafting, or storytelling. Through repetition, symbols were reinforced, visual languages codified, and the community's collective memory extended into the physical space of the cave. The cave was both a classroom and a sanctuary, a place where humans recorded what mattered most, the interplay between life, death, survival, and wonder. The locations of paintings and carvings were chosen with deliberation. Deep within caves, far from the entrances, the air is cooler and more stable, preserving pigments for millennia. These spaces were mysterious and sacred, approached with reverence. Some walls are angled to capture flickering firelight, giving animals the illusion of movement. In this darkness, humans encountered not only their own reflection, but the echo of ancestral knowledge, the presence of spirits, or perhaps the imagined forms of the animals themselves. The act of art-making transformed the cave into a liminal space, a bridge between the known world outside and the invisible forces guiding existence within. Evidence suggests that art also functioned as a mnemonic device. Hunters could review images of animals they had encountered, embedding observation into visual memory. Symbols, abstract marks, and repeated motifs helped convey patterns in seasons, animal behavior, or success in hunting strategies. These were, in effect, early instructional manuals, integrated seamlessly with spiritual and social dimensions. A particular swirl or dot might indicate a migration path, a birthing site, or a warning of predators. To the Ice Age mind, practical knowledge and spiritual reflection were inseparable, and art became the medium through which both were transmitted. Beyond practical considerations, there was profound emotional and spiritual resonance. The act of painting or carving allowed humans to process fear, loss, hope, and gratitude. Life in the Ice Age was perilous. Illness, injury, predation, and scarcity were constants. Art offered a way to cope, a ritualized engagement with uncertainty. Some anthropologists suggest that painting large, imposing animals could be a method of asserting control over them, not literally, but psychologically. To depict a mammoth with precise horns and massive legs was to confront the danger it represented, to acknowledge its power, and to integrate it into human understanding rather than remaining at its mercy. Music, sound, and rhythm were often part of the artistic ritual. Evidence of flutes carved from bird bones or mammoth ivory suggests that sound accompanied visual expression. Singing, chanting, or drumming in the cave may have been linked with painting, creating a multi-sensory environment where humans engaged with both the real and imagined worlds. These rituals reinforced communal identity, teaching young members the traditions, beliefs, and skills necessary to thrive. Art was not solitary, it was participatory, a shared expression of humanity in a hostile environment. The spatial arrangement of images in caves also hints at narrative thinking. Animals are often grouped in ways suggesting scenes, predators stalking prey, herds in motion, hunting strategies dramatized in charcoal and ochre. Humans may have traced these images with their fingers or acted them out in firelight, rehearsing skills and social roles. Art, in this sense, was rehearsal and record-keeping, a way to structure knowledge and embed it in a form accessible to memory and story. Some caves show abstract symbols alongside animals, geometric shapes whose meanings remain mysterious, perhaps representations of celestial bodies, spiritual concepts, or clan identifiers. Even without full understanding, the presence of abstraction demonstrates the capacity for abstract thought and symbolic reasoning, hallmarks of cognitive modernity. Through art, Ice Age humans established a sense of continuity and permanence. Fires, tools, and shelters were temporary. The walls of caves were enduring. By leaving images that persisted for generations, humans created a dialogue across time, speaking to descendants who would one day stumble upon these walls. They demonstrated resilience not only in surviving the physical cold, but in asserting presence, memory, and understanding within a transient and dangerous world. To make art was to declare, "We were here, we saw, we understood, we endured." Cave paintings and carvings also formed a foundation for belief systems. The repeated depiction of animals, humans, and symbolic shapes created shared cosmologies. They marked sacred spaces, teaching younger members about the power and presence of forces beyond immediate comprehension. Rituals may have accompanied these images: offerings of food, careful placement of bones, or sequences of gestures and dance designed to honor, appease, or invoke supernatural aid. Art was thus inseparable from spirituality, from the practices that allowed humans to interpret and influence the unpredictable forces of survival. In essence, the cave walls were mirrors of the human psyche, reflecting hopes, fears, and knowledge back to the community. They were guides, teachers, and companions, offering continuity in a landscape of impermanence. Every stroke, every carved curve, every smudge of ochre carried intent, care, and purpose. These were not idle creations, but deliberate acts of engagement with the world, evidence of the human mind striving to make sense of and to coexist with forces far greater than itself. Even today, the impact of these artistic achievements resonates. The ability to see, interpret, and represent the world, to embed meaning in symbols and objects, remains central to human culture. In the glow of a modern gallery or the quiet reflection before an artifact in a museum, we encounter echoes of those first humans in their caves, their hands reaching across millennia to communicate presence, understanding, and care. Their survival depended not only on fire, tools, and food, but also on imagination, reflection, and the courage to leave part of themselves behind. The world shifted imperceptibly at first, almost like a slow breath that no single human could feel, yet which altered everything. The glaciers that had once stretched like frozen seas across the continents began to recede, their great walls of ice cracking and spilling meltwater into rivers and oceans. Valleys, once choked with snow and ice, opened to pale light and fresh air, revealing land that had been buried for tens of thousands of years. The sound of running water grew louder in the spring thaw, the gurgle and rush of streams where none had been before. The Ice Age, which had seemed eternal to those who had lived within its frozen grip, was ending, and the people of that world felt the first stirrings of a new reality, uncertain and unpredictable. For thousands of years, humans had been attuned to ice and snow. Their clothing, shelters, hunting methods, and migrations had been tailored to endure a cold so profound that frostbite was a constant threat. The sudden warming disrupted rhythms that had been painstakingly learned. Rivers swelled and overflowed. Melting permafrost transformed the tundra into muddy bogs, and familiar migration paths of prey animals changed or disappeared altogether. A steppe that had once supported mammoth and bison thinned, replaced by shrubs and trees, altering the very food chain that humans had followed so reliably. Bands of humans were forced to move, to experiment with new strategies, and to negotiate landscapes that looked familiar but were fundamentally altered beneath their feet. The change was both physical and psychological. Humans had built their lives around predictable seasons of ice and snow. Suddenly the world became fluid. Early morning frosts no longer hardened the ground reliably, making it difficult to store food or to track animals across frozen trails. Rivers that had once been safe frozen highways became rushing torrents in spring, swallowing bridges of ice and forcing entire groups to detour or risk injury. Trees began to encroach upon plains, altering the open visibility that hunters had relied upon for detecting prey. The creatures that humans depended upon, the reindeer, bison and mammoth, began to disperse or retreat into shrinking habitats, forcing people to adapt quickly or face starvation. Yet human ingenuity, honed over millennia in the face of adversity, did not falter. Some groups learned to exploit newly emergent landscapes, hunting forest game like deer and wild boar, fishing in rivers swollen with meltwater, gathering nuts, berries, and edible roots that had once been scarce. New forms of tools were developed to accommodate forested terrains, traps, nets, hooks, and snares that allowed humans to capture smaller, faster, and more elusive animals than the mammoth or bison of the plains. Communities experimented with plant processing, learning which roots could be cooked to remove toxins and which seeds could be dried and stored. The Ice Age humans' intimate knowledge of the land's rhythms allowed them to pivot quickly, translating survival skills across changing environments. These climatic changes were visible in the daily life of human groups. Families moving along former glacial valleys noticed the thawing streams revealing smooth stones and clay deposits. Children could play briefly on stretches of earth previously hidden beneath ice, scooping mud or small fish from shallow pools, while adults observed tracking signs of animals now adapting to the new habitats. Hunters learned to anticipate the movement of prey that had previously been seasonal, adjusting ambushes and migration following strategies. Fires were tended carefully to dry wet furs, cook newly harvested plants, and maintain warmth in nights that remained cold despite the warming trend. Human survival required constant observation, flexibility, and collaboration, and in many ways the warming climate demanded more skill than the frozen world ever had. The retreat of glaciers also exposed new opportunities. Rich river valleys emerged, abundant with fish, waterfowl, and plant life. Open plains transformed into meadows and woodlands, allowing humans to experiment with sedentary or semi-sedentary settlement. Archaeologists suggest that some of the first permanent or long-term villages emerged during this period, as humans discovered resources that could support more stable habitation. These settlements were carefully located near water and food sources, and evidence of early storage pits, hearths and shelters indicates an adaptation to a climate that allowed for the first time in tens of thousands of years a partial escape from constant mobility. But the changes were uneven, and sometimes abrupt. A single season of early thaw could flood a valley, washing away temporary shelters and forcing a community to scramble for higher ground. Conversely, sudden cold snaps could freeze rivers unexpectedly, endangering travelers and animals alike. Survival demanded a keen awareness of the environment, a constant reading of the land and sky, and the ability to predict conditions that could change in hours rather than weeks. Humans began to record these observations in subtle ways: marks on bones, lines in the earth, mnemonic patterns in group behavior, creating a cultural memory of environmental fluctuation that would shape generations to come. As the ice receded, new landscapes also fostered new social patterns. Groups that had been isolated by glaciers were now able to interact, exchanging knowledge, tools, and genes. This led to a diversification of survival strategies. Techniques honed in tundra regions, such as specialized hunting and hide processing, were shared with those adapting to forested zones, while forest dwellers introduced knowledge of plant foraging, woodworking, and shelter construction. The warming climate was both challenge and opportunity. It forced movement, but it also enabled cross-cultural connections that strengthened human resilience. Humans also responded emotionally and spiritually to the changing environment. The permanence of ice had seemed absolute, a constant in a precarious world. Its retreat introduced both relief and uncertainty. Rituals likely evolved to address these changes: offerings to spirits believed to control weather, ceremonies acknowledging the shifting balance of life and death, dances or songs intended to honor the return of rivers. the emergence of plants, and the migration of birds. Cave paintings, carvings, and other symbolic art of the late Ice Age increasingly depict changing landscapes, new animals, and abstract signs that may relate to environmental understanding. Through art and ritual, humans sought to comprehend and influence the world around them, integrating observation with belief. The disappearance of glaciers also had profound consequences for human nutrition and health. Megafauna, that had been a mainstay of the diet, began to vanish, forcing a heavier reliance on smaller game and plant foods. The need for more varied diets likely drove experimentation in cooking, preservation, and storage techniques. Tools adapted to the changing terrain, allowing humans to hunt in wooded areas, fish in rivers, and gather a wider variety of edible plants. Dental and skeletal analysis from archaeological sites of this period show changes in wear patterns and health indicators, reflecting shifts in diet and activity levels. As humans adjusted to the warming world, migration patterns shifted once again, not because of ice but because of the search for fertile land. Coastal areas became more accessible as sea levels rose, creating new opportunities for fishing and shellfish gathering. River valleys expanded, providing reliable freshwater, plant growth, and habitat for animals that could be hunted or trapped. Humans learned to read the new environment with the same attentiveness that had guided them across ice sheets. Routes of movement were no longer strictly dictated by frozen plains. Instead, they followed watercourses, forest edges, and resource-rich areas, creating intricate networks of mobility across the newly emerging landscapes. The end of the Ice Age was also a time of experimentation with settlement strategies. Some groups adopted semi-permanent dwellings in caves, rock shelters, or constructed huts, using knowledge of insulation, fire, and storage to survive winters without constant migration. These sites reveal hearths carefully positioned to maximize warmth, sleeping platforms raised from damp ground, and storage pits for food. Humans were integrating past knowledge with new possibilities, combining mobility with permanence in ways that would shape future societies. This period of warming and glacial retreat was a crucible of adaptation. The people of the Ice Age had survived millennia of cold and scarcity, and now faced a different set of challenges: change, unpredictability, and the disappearance of long relied upon resources. Yet their accumulated knowledge, flexibility, and social cohesion allowed them not only to survive, but to thrive. Communities learned to read the subtle signs of seasonal change, to adapt diet and tools, and to reorganize social structures in response to new landscape. Human ingenuity, observation, and cooperation turned potential catastrophe into opportunity. The Ice Age may have ended thousands of years ago, yet its legacy continued to shape humanity in ways that were subtle, pervasive, and profound. The skills honed during millennia of frozen landscapes, the ability to track animals, read the signs of seasons, understand the flow of rivers, and anticipate the whims of weather, were carried forward from generation to generation, embedded in memory, story, and practice. Children grew up learning these techniques, not through books, but through observation and apprenticeship. They watched elders demonstrate how to flake stone into precise tools, how to sharpen bone implements, and how to construct shelters that could withstand wind, rain, or snow. Each skill was part of a repertoire essential for survival, but also a cultural inheritance, a form of knowledge that gave structure, confidence, and identity to human communities. Stone tools, the hallmarks of Ice Age ingenuity, were more than utilitarian objects. They were extensions of human cognition. Each carefully struck flake represented an understanding of geometry, pressure, and material properties. Knappers knew how to select the right stone, how to angle blows, and how to anticipate fractures. These techniques were observed and practiced from youth, often in the rhythm of everyday life. Children handling waste flakes under the watchful eyes of their elders, slowly internalizing patterns that would allow them, years later, to create tools capable of cutting meat, scraping hides, or piercing thick hides of bison or mammoth. These lessons were intimate, tactile, and highly personal, yet they also formed the foundation for innovations that would persist long after the glaciers retreated. Beyond stone, the use of bone, antler, and wood exemplified the adaptability and resourcefulness of Ice Age human. Harpoons, needles, awls, and fishing hooks were created with careful precision, often from materials that were abundant but difficult to shape. Learning to work with these substances required patience, dexterity, and imagination. Techniques such as binding, polishing, and incising were refined over generations, each discovery building on the last. Communities shared knowledge freely, understanding that survival depended not only on individual skill, but on the collective competence of the tribe. These lessons in collaboration, innovation, and resource management became part of the inherited toolkit of humanity, forming the basis for future technological developments. Hunting and foraging strategies evolved into intricate systems of knowledge, tracking prey across frozen tundras, open steppes, or newly emerging forests demanded attention to subtle environmental cues, the shape of a footprint, the broken twig of a travel corridor, the smell carried by the wind. Hunters observed the timing of migrations, the birth cycles of animals, and seasonal vegetation changes, all of which influenced the movement of prey. These observations were encoded in story, song, and ritual. When elders recounted past hunts around the fire, they were not merely entertaining, they were teaching younger members how to survive. These lessons carried forward, forming a lineage of ecological knowledge that allowed humans to thrive in diverse climates long after the Ice Age ended. Cooking, preservation, and storage techniques were equally significant. Humans learned to dry meat, extract marrow, smoke fish, and store seeds and nuts, translating ephemeral resources into long-term sustenance. Fire management itself, which had been essential in freezing landscapes, became a core skill transferable to new environments. The ability to create and control fire, to direct smoke, and to harness heat transformed human life, allowing people to cook, sterilize tools, repel predators, and forge social bonds around warmth and light. These practices, developed under the extreme pressures of glacial survival, were passed down and adapted to every subsequent environment humans encountered. Shelter-building techniques also endured. Early humans had learned to construct windbreaks from mammoth bones, to insulate huts with layered furs, and to situate dwellings near water sources without risking flooding. These architectural insights were practical but also informed cultural rituals, arranging spaces for social cohesion, sleeping platforms for safety, and storage areas for sustenance. Even in regions where mammoths no longer roamed, the principles of shelter construction, spatial planning, and adaptive design were applied, ensuring human communities could survive in deserts, forests, and temperate climates alike. Equally important were the cognitive and social skills developed during the Ice Age. Humans learned to plan long-term, coordinate complex hunting strategies, and communicate detailed information about landscapes, animal behavior, and weather patterns. These skills enhanced collective decision-making, reinforced social bonds, and facilitated the creation of shared cultural practices. Storytelling, art, and ritual were not merely expressions of creativity, they were repositories of knowledge. Cave paintings, carved figurines, and symbolic objects encoded lessons about the environment, survival strategies, and social norms. These cultural artifacts were teaching tools as much as aesthetic creations, passing critical information to generations that would never experience the frozen steppes firsthand. The ability to innovate under pressure became a defining human trait. Ice Age communities faced constant threats, predation, scarcity, illness, and extreme weather. In response, they developed flexible problem-solving strategies that could be applied across new contexts. When glaciers retreated, these adaptive skills allowed humans to transition from the frozen tundra to forested valleys, riverine systems, and coastal environments. Tools and methods were modified, knowledge transferred, and behaviors adjusted. This flexibility, rooted in Ice Age experience, formed the backbone of human technological evolution, underpinning advances in agriculture, construction, and navigation thousands of years later. Knowledge of ecology and environmental patterns was another critical legacy. Humans of the Ice Age observed the intricate interdependence of species, the timing of migrations, and the availability of resources across landscapes. They learned to anticipate scarcity and abundance, to diversify their diet, and to optimize foraging strategies. These insights were encoded in oral traditions and ritual practices, forming early systems of environmental management. When forests expanded and megafauna disappeared, humans were able to draw upon this ecological literacy to adapt successfully, guiding settlement patterns, dietary choices, and social organization in new landscapes. Even abstract thinking and symbolic reasoning were carried forward. The ability to conceptualize, plan, and imagine scenarios beyond immediate perception, skills developed in tracking animals, creating art and strategizing hunts, became crucial for later developments in agriculture, trade, and social hierarchy. Early humans had learned to think in timescales longer than a single season, predicting outcomes of hunts, migrations, and environmental shifts. This capacity for foresight, embedded in cognitive frameworks established during the Ice Age, laid the foundation for human civilization itself. In addition, the Ice Age left a legacy of resilience and psychological endurance. Humans had survived extreme cold, scarce resources, and unpredictable environments. They learned patience, observation, and cooperation as essential survival tools. The cultural emphasis on sharing, mutual aid, and intergenerational teaching became deeply ingrained, shaping social norms and ethical frameworks in human communities long after the ice receded. These lessons remain relevant today. The capacity to adapt, to work collectively, and to plan strategically are as much a part of human inheritance as the tools and techniques themselves. Art and ritual also carried forward into subsequent generations. The practice of decorating objects, creating symbolic representations of the world, and embedding meaning in material culture helped humans navigate uncertainty. Figurines, painted objects, and engraved tools were not merely aesthetic. They conveyed knowledge, reinforced social cohesion, and encoded practical and spiritual guidance. These traditions informed the development of belief systems, moral frameworks, and early forms of organized ritual, illustrating that the Ice Age had shaped not only human survival strategies, but human consciousness itself. Even linguistic and communicative skills were part of this legacy. Coordinating hunts, teaching skills, and transmitting cultural memory required sophisticated systems of language, gesture, and symbolic edsumenmek. These abilities facilitated the formation of larger social networks, trade connections, and inter-community cooperation. The emphasis on communication, learned and refined under the pressures of the Ice Age, became a foundational component of human social evolution, supporting complex societies in subsequent millennia. In sum, the Ice Age gifted humanity with a repertoire of skills, knowledge, and cultural practices that would persist long after the glaciers melted. Stone and bone tools, ecological understanding, hunting strategies, fire management, shelter construction, artistic expression, ritual, and social organization all formed a cumulative inheritance. This knowledge enabled humans to transition to new climates, exploit emerging resources, and lay the foundations for agriculture, permanent settlements, and civilization. The legacy of the Ice Age was not merely survival but preparation. It forged the cognitive, cultural, and technological capacities that continue to define humanity today.